boarding schools, and I'll say why I say that. The existence of the EAA is premised on the belief that the solution to Detroit's educational woes is to remove schools from majority control by people of color and put them into majority control by European Americans. That's why I call it the white man's burden in my title. Now blame this all on me, okay? Don't, it's this professor who said all these crazy things. They honestly believe that if they can just relieve blacks of the control of their communities, it will all get better. Because they just love Detroit's children so much more than Detroit's families do. With all of these reforms, whether it's governance of the city or governance of the schools, the underlying belief is that schools for children of color can succeed if only adults of color don't control them. You can look at what they are bringing and see that at each level, and we need to pay attention to this. Most of us already are. Their belief is that the core of the problem is African American control of African American child rearing. That there is something in African American culture that is bringing ruin everywhere, they believe. That's what they believe, whether they are completely aware of it or not. We can tell by their actions. What they do reveals much about their beliefs. They believe that the essential problem in our cities is black culture, and that they can save black youth by separating them as much as possible from black governance, black educators, and black families. Black governance by not allowing those that the people of Detroit elect to govern the city and schools to actually govern. Democracy is okay for white people, but black people just can't handle it. That's what they say. When white people elect a criminal loser, and really, let's face it, they are all criminal losers. When we elect Richard Nixon, for example, we don't say let's take away the right of white people to elect the president. Look who they voted in. Look at the low turnout for that election. But they do when black people elect someone, like Kwame Kilpatrick. Never mind that his campaign was bankrolled by white corporate elites. No, black people, they think, shouldn't vote for their leaders anymore. That's for white people who can handle it. Teachers, they believe, what we need to do is fire DPS teachers en masse, including the many teachers of color among them. Move schools to the EAA and hire as many teachers from the disproportionately white, young, female, and privileged Teach for America as possible. And Detroit's children should spend longer school days and longer school years in these new, better schools with less black governance and less black teachers, more time away from black families and their influence. Because behind all this, they see black culture as pathological. They see that as what needs to be broken. Black culture, the very thing that helped African Americans to survive 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, everything. The thing that is celebrated as the impetus of democratizing movements all over the world. People in China invoking MLK when they fight for their freedom. That's the problem, black culture. How do you separate black students from black culture? How do you move the control of black children as much as possible out of the control of black adults? Well, you just ban the school board, you put the governor or the state superintendent of instruction in charge, you take the teaching force, 15 Detroit schools, fire all the teachers, and replace veteran African American teachers, male and female, with mostly female young white women. Separate black students from black elected leadership, and from significant presence of black educators. Finally, maximize the time that black students spend in this increasingly separated environment. All of these changes, whether done consciously or not, move black and Latino students out from under the tutelage of adults of color as elected leaders, as educators, and as family. That's what they believe will break the cycle of poverty. It's not that black people made this country rich. They don't recognize that. Through slavery, unpaid or underpaid labor after slavery, lower pay with less advancement in industry, and so on. It's not that mostly white corporate elites abandoned the city because they could make greater profit by exploiting worse working conditions and lax environmental laws in the third world. No, that's not what made Detroit poor and our schools poor, they believe. It's black people and black culture, they believe. That's why I say that EA schools are like the BIA Indian boarding schools of previous decades and previous generations. The explicit purpose of those schools was to break Native American culture, to first marginalize Native American people on reservations, and then to separate from their children so that their children could be assimilated, so that their native culture would wither and not be passed on to the next generation. And jump ahead a little bit.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it really has to go back to their view of the city. Most people in the state believe that Detroit is poor because black people messed it up. Now think for a moment how stupid and uneducated you have to be to believe that. This is what they think, and they base their laws and reforms on what they think. They think that white people lived in middle-class homes in Detroit, and the schools were fine, and the neighborhoods were fine, and then black people took over and chased away the good white people, and the neighborhoods and the schools all went downhill. That's what most white people believe. And that includes the ones in the governor's office and in the legislature and those who vote them into power. They didn't pay attention in school, so they apparently don't know that blacks were intentionally recruited to come to Detroit and other industrial cities to drive down wages. That when they arrived, they were only allowed to live in certain neighborhoods and could only advance so far in their workplaces. That the decline of Detroit didn't start with the '67 rebellion, but started more than 15 years before that when jobs began leaving because profiteers could make better profits by hiring more flexible workers elsewhere. Their realtors engaged in blockbusting to scare whites out of their neighborhoods so that they could sell their homes for less than they were worth, and they could then be sold for more than they were worth to blacks. So the government then subsidized suburban sprawl, but only for those who were good risks or loans, racial code words. That we, the taxpayers, paid for the interstate highways and the corporate and housing subsidies that made it make sense to flee. That those factors, those interstates, and those policies destroyed black communities and black businesses. Most white people don't know that because they're uneducated. They're the ones who need to be at the bottom of those achievement charts. And that would be just the usual bad news if they weren't also the ones who are running things right now. It's a much easier thing to say that black culture caused all this, so much easier than actually learning something than being educated. I'm going to stop because I feel like I'm using too much time. But thanks for listening to me.